Welcome in, everybody, to a bonus episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great Wednesday evening or Thursday morning as you listen to this show. This is a bonus episode, and it's for one simple reason. On late Wednesday, we got news that Bobby Knight, the legendary college basketball coach, passed away at the age of 83. And I thought we should just do a bonus episode. We don't need to wait till Friday. We don't need to lump it in with a busy college football and NFL slate. Let's just talk about Coach Knight, because I will tell you this. Obviously, I think anybody who knows me or knows my work knows I'm a college hoops, love it, love everything about it. And I have been fascinated by Bobby Knight for years, have read Season on the Brink a bunch of times, every documentary, every whatever. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to get a quick word from our partners. We are going to come back and we are going to react to the entire legacy of the legendary Bobby Knight, who passed away at 83 on Wednesday. A quick break, word from our partners. We'll be right back, and we'll talk Bobby Knight. Thank you, everybody, as always, for your support of the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. And we have a major announcement, as legal sports betting is now in the state of Kentucky. That is right. The Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube has partnered with DraftKings Sportsbook and the DraftKings Sportsbook app. And here is the best part. DraftKings has an incredible offer for listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod who are first-time customers with DraftKings. This is the deal. Here's what you need to know. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Bet $5 on any game, just $5, and you get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you use the promo code Torres. That's right. It's that simple. Again, first-time customers, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Bet $5 on any game, pro, college, any sport you want, and get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you use the code Torres. Thank you to our new partners, DraftKings Sportsbook. Thrilled to be working with them. Take advantage of their offer now. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So, as I said, today's show, and I don't know how long we're going to go here, but I want to spend just 8, 10, 12, 15 minutes, whatever it ends up being, talking about Bobby Knight, his legacy with his passing. Again, everybody knows the deal by now. 83 years old, he passed away. And like I said, when we get big news, sometimes we just turn on the mic, talk a little bit. It's a little bit therapeutic. But the one thing that I would say from my personal perspective is that I, over the last decade or so, have become a little bit of a Bobby Knight fanatic. About 10 years ago, I read the book A Season on the Brink, and we'll get into some of those details in a minute. But for people who have not read that book, John Feinstein, an author who's still writing to this day, John Feinstein followed him around for a year, was in every coaching meeting, every practice. You have unbelievable access. And you see some of the negative stuff. You see some of the anger, some of the outbursts, but you also see a basketball genius, okay? You see a guy that in every moment knows the exact right thing to say at the right time. Sometimes he's really mad. Sometimes he's cursing. Sometimes he's gentle. Sometimes he's kind. Sometimes he strikes fear in you. Sometimes he can feel the vibe going the wrong way and he just throws everybody out of practice. But he always had a great pulse on his team in every moment. And I think that's the thing that in his legacy does get lost a lot, is that everybody knows about some of the negative, and we'll get into in a minute. But anybody who was around him will tell you that he was a basketball savant, okay? The resume speaks for itself, but for people who do not know, starts at Army, and has immediate success in his early to mid-20s. He's coaching Army. Gets the Indiana job in like 1971. He's 30 years old, 31 years old. By year 2, has Indiana in the Final Four. By 1975, how about this? Enters the tournament undefeated with what he called maybe his best team. Everybody remembers that in 1976, Indiana wins the national championship, last undefeated national champion. What people don't realize, or what a lot of people don't realize, we'll have Indiana fans chime in on YouTube or on the comment section on Apple. What a lot of people don't realize, Bobby Knight and many players in his era said that 1975 team was maybe the best team he ever has. They lose in the tournament. Scott May breaks his foot. They come back the following year, go 32-0, win the national championship, the last undefeated team in college basketball history through both the regular season and the postseason. Beyond that, it really is a level of real sustained success and dominance over the next about 15 or so years. Wins another national championship in 1981 with Isaiah Thomas. wins another one in 87 with Steve Alford, 5 Final Fours total, 11 Big Ten regular season titles. Remember, that era, the Big Ten did not have a conference tournament. So you talk about how good the Big Ten was during that era, 11 conference championships, as I said, 5 Final Fours, 3 national championships. And the thing that stands out, a coach is coach. This was not a guy that just had a conveyor belt of talent rolling through that team and that program. Thought Dan Wetzel did a good job kind of memorializing him on Yahoo. And he brought up this point. Isaiah Thomas is really the only NBA superstar that ever played for him, and really essentially the only guy up until late that left college early. He had a lot of Steve Alfords. He had a lot of Quinn Buckners, guys that grew into great college players under his watch, but weren't great NBA players. And in some cases weren't even great high school players that developed under his watch. Like I said, I think he was a basketball savant, the likes of which he doesn't get credit for, right? Because there was so much negativity at the end, so many off the court headlines. Even when he did TV, I was thinking about this. When you do TV, you kind of play by the rules and you kind of yuck it up and you kind of be friendly and you kind of, kiss butt and do all that. He wouldn't do it. Wouldn't wear suits, still wore sweaters, was kind of a little grumpy on TV. And so I don't think people, because anyone really under 35, they never saw him at his peak. And even when he was on TV, it wasn't like he was likable or easy to get behind. But the basketball savant stuff comes out. I shared a clip on Twitter on Wednesday night. There is a clip of him. He coached the 1984 Olympic team. So that's part of his legacy as well. 3 national championships and a gold medal with the Olympic team up until the Dream Team, and probably since the Dream Team, the most dominant Olympic team that the U.S. has ever fielded outside of 1992 with the original Dream Team. But after he coached that team, they had Michael Jordan on that team. They had a bunch of guys that went on to play in the NBA. There's a great clip of him talking about Michael Jordan. Said he's the most competitive basketball player I've ever been around. Says he's the most athletic player he's ever been around. Says he's got the greatest skill he's ever been around. How about this for Bobby Knight talking about a savant? He called Michael Jordan the greatest basketball player that he had ever seen before Michael Jordan ever played a game. The greatest basketball player that he had ever seen before Michael Jordan played a game. Do you know the famous quote when he found out that the Portland Trailblazers had no plans to draft Michael Jordan at number 3 and chose Sam Bowie instead? And this isn't an anti-Sam Bowie thing because I love him. I love, that guy has gotten so much crap through the years. But the famous quote that Bobby Knight had when he found out that Portland planned on passing on Jordan, it was because they had Clyde Drexler. And so Bob Knight was asked about it. He said, well, what do you think about the Trailblazers? It looks like they're going to go with Bowie at number 2 instead of taking Jordan at number 3. And he said, I'm told they need a center. Well, I told them, draft Jordan and play him at center. He's that good. So this was a guy that just was around basketball, understood basketball, loved basketball. And again, if you read Season on the Brink, I don't ask you guys and girls to do much, but if you have time this winter, over Christmas, over the summer, on spring break, wherever you are, get Season on the Brink. It is so gripping. It is so surreal. It's access that we would never see in college basketball in 2023. Feinstein, again, is in every practice, every game, every film session. And yes, there are a lot of negative moments for Bobby Knight, but you can also see how tortured he is, how much basketball eats at him, and really what a brilliant basketball mind this guy is. I might have said it already. I don't even know. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. But he just had a great feel for with that specific team, with that specific group. And it was like this for his whole career. When to push, when to pull back, when to get mad. He'd famously just start throwing guys out of practice when he felt like energy was too low. There were moments, I think they were playing a game at Minnesota or Wisconsin or something, and he's just walking the streets at night, just trying to figure out what's going on, what's not. I remember he used to like to eat ice cream late at night. I don't think he was a drinker. I think that, to take edge off, he'd eat some vanilla ice cream when things got stressful. But if you read that book, it's impossible not to appreciate it. And I'll give you one other thing to appreciate before we do talk about some of the negatives. I know that NCAA rules are like a joke now and everybody makes fun of them. I give Bob Knight credit because in that era, more than anyone else, he was a stickler for NCAA rules. He was the only person that called out John Wooden as it pertained to Sam Gilbert, the famous booster that was basically, Sam Gilbert was the original college sports collective, okay? And then this isn't a bash on John Wooden session here. But Bob Knight called out Sam Gilbert, called out John Wooden in that era when it was unpopular to. In Season on the Brink, there's a moment in time, Steve Alford, his best player, poses for a calendar. It's a charity calendar. I think it's for a sorority or something. And the NCAA comes down, and of course, because they're the NCAA, they suspended him for a game. And it wasn't just a game. It was a big game. I think it was either Indiana or Kentucky, two really good teams of that era. And Bob Knight said, Steve Alford, what are you doing? You're an idiot. Go sit on the bench. What are you doing? How can you do this to the team? And Steve Alford felt terrible and all that. And I actually talked to Steve Alford about it later. Maybe I'll share that story in a minute. But I just bring it up because he was a stickler for NCAA rules, and he played by the rules in an era where so few did. Now, look, there are the negatives. I'd be remiss. I'm not going to be that guy that only glorifies somebody. He had some moments that I think he would regret. We know about throwing the chair on the floor. We know about certainly how things ended at Indiana. For people who don't remember, got caught on video choking a player, putting his hands on a player's neck. And ironically, people don't remember this. He didn't even get fired for that. It was kind of like a one strike and you're out policy. And then like a month later, he blew up on some student walking through campus and threatened him or whatever. And that was what ultimately ended up being his undoing. There was an arrest in Puerto Rico when he was coaching the national team, attacked a cop or put his hands on a cop. There's a lot of other stuff. You know, people are going to show an interview with Connie Chung where he said some very regrettable things about he said some stuff about, and, you know, earmuffs if you're with kids in the car or whatever. But he said some regrettable things about sexual assault. They weren't funny then. They're not funny now. I'm not making excuses for him. He was an imperfect guy. But what I would also say, and again, if read Season on the Brink, I cannot express it enough. By the way, I've watched every documentary, every social media clip, every whatever of Bobby Knight. When you get to know his story, like I said, you get to know he's layered. There's a lot of bad. There's some other stuff I didn't even mention. By the way, he slapped Joe B. Hall, almost caused a brawl between Kentucky and Indiana many years ago. But what also stands out is there was other stuff that he did behind the scenes. There was a moment in time where one of his players got in a car crash, was on vacation. He immediately comes home, immediately starts raising money to help with hospital bills, to help with this, to help with that, gave money out of his own pocket to, I forget if it was to revamp the kid's house or whatever. And then after that, continued to raise money to help people in wheelchairs and things of that nature. So you have that side. I will say, for the most part, most people who were around him swear by him. Chris Beard, I'm sure Chris Beard will be asked about this. Chris Beard loves him. Chris Beard adores him. Chris Beard, to this day, for people who don't know, Chris Beard was a assistant at Texas Tech under him when he was at Texas Tech. But to this day, he talks about the lessons that Coach Knight taught and how much this mattered and how much that mattered. Again, Steve Alford, I don't want to talk too much about a private conversation I had with Steve Alford when he was the head coach at UCLA, but I asked him about Coach Knight and he lit up. You know, he played for him for 4 years. He got some tongue lashing, some good, some bad. But he had nothing but great things to say about him, what he learned, what he knew, all that good stuff. I would add, Bob Knight has a very interesting role in the history of college basketball. I think most people know, but Coach K was a struggling assistant or struggling head coach at Army, not coaching very well. Bob Knight calls up Duke and says, Duke, Tom Butters was the name of the AD. You need to hire this guy. Coach K the record was abysmal. And they hire Coach K, and 2-3 years in, everybody's ready to fire him. Tom Butters sticks by him, and he turns into the best coach in the history of college basketball. What a lot of people don't know, and I talked to this guy about this on the podcast. Jim Calhoun, the legendary UConn coach, the spring that he got offered the UConn job, he was also offered Northwestern. And I don't remember all the details. Maybe the interview with Calhoun is in the archives here somewhere. But Jim Calhoun was leaning towards taking the Northwestern job. And he calls Bobby Knight in the Big Ten. And Bobby Knight says, take UConn, take the University of Connecticut. What he said was, you want the University of in front of your university. State school, well-funded, well-supported. Jim Calhoun goes to UConn, wins 3 national championships of his own. The rest is history. Dan Hurley is carrying on his legacy there. So you talk about a guy that is revered by people who knew him. charity work, changed the history of college basketball with the Coach K stuff, with the Jim Calhoun stuff. Obviously, again, Chris Beard, Dusty May, his former student managers, of course, now at Florida Atlantic, just led them to a Final Four. So he wasn't perfect. He was imperfect. Even late in his career, didn't speak to Coach K for many years. There was a quote from Coach K that he didn't like, refused to speak to him. I think they started to make up, 20, 25 years later when Coach K eventually surpassed him for the all-time wins or 1,000 wins or whatever. Lastly, what I would say, I'm glad that in his later years, my understanding is not only did he soften a bit, but that, he reconnected with the Indiana community. I think after he got fired there, I think he was afraid to, he was afraid to kind of come back to the community. It didn't feel like he was welcome there. And then whatever it was, it would have been maybe the 2021, 2022 season, but there was some sort of anniversary. Maybe it was the 30-year anniversary of his 81 national championship team. I guess it would have been the 40-year anniversary. And he came back and he saw the guys and he spent some time around them. Now, obviously, his former assistant, Mike Woodson, is carrying on his legacy. So I don't really know what else there is to say, but I just find the guy to be fascinating. And again, I'm not going to undersell some of the not good stuff, but I also do think that if you understand what kind of coach he was, and that's the last thing too. And I know I'm rambling, but I'm just trying to get out all my thoughts here. But you look at Bobby Knight, and I think that the legacy is, I don't even know how to describe it. And what I would say is if you go back to those early to mid 80s, the guy was larger than life. I mean, first of all, it's kind of cool because remember, the Indiana-Kentucky basketball rivalry is coming back over these next couple of years. And those two teams, border states, used to play at the Hoosier Dome and Freedom Hall, and they used to get 30,000 people for those games. Bobby Knight, you can find clips of him on Letterman and Leno and the late night talk shows. And he was like, we call people larger than life, but he was a famous college basketball coach. I don't know if there's a single coach right now. Now, there's no such thing as late night TV, at least not any that I watch, but he was mainstream. He was hated. He was loved, but you cared, but you watched Indiana basketball. And so, man, this guy is such a fascinating figure. Listen, there's no positives when a guy passes away. I do think it's cool that his former player, Mike Woodson, is there. I know for Indiana fans watching, I was critical of the hire, but Mike Woodson, I haven't had a chance to spend time around Coach Woodson, but he is a guy that talks about the legacy of Bobby Knight, the impact of Bobby Knight, why it was so important for him to come back to this job, why it was so important for him to come back and be the head coach at Indiana, because he wanted to carry on that legacy of Bobby Knight. The defense, the motion offense, everything that Bobby Knight was about. And again, I can't say it enough. There's a lot of good articles in the Sports Illustrated Vault, if you have a minute, and Season on the Brink, because I know I've said it a few times, but anybody under 35, I just think that you only remember him at maybe even 40 at this point, right? Because his last Final Four is 93. So you could be 40 years old, born in 83. You barely remember that last Final Four. But for people who are older, people that spent time around him, people that grew up watching his teams, they were feared. They were fundamentally sound. They were well coached. They were dominant. Bobby Knight passes away at the age of 83. And I don't really know that I have much else to say about it. So we'll wrap today's bonus episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. We'll get out of here. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that little subscribe button. Obviously, we have our Torres on Indiana page. We'll be covering this all night long on the Torres on Indiana Twitter page. Make sure to follow there. But subscribe here. Subscribe to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. We'll be back with a normal Friday episode where we talk about the college football weekend that is. But rest in peace to Bobby Knight, a legend at the age of 83.